The obsidian walls of the grand conclave of the Ethelgard vibrated with a low, thrumming frequency, a sound not of machinery, but of the very planet groaning under the weight of the orbital bombardment that had ceased only moments ago, leaving a silence that was far heavier and more terrifying than the thunder of war. High Counselor Vyantara stood at the apex of the central dais, her four hands resting upon the cold, smooth surface of the strategy table, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the holographic ruin of a dozen star systems that swirled above the assembly, a kaleidoscope of failure and extinction that bathed the gathered elders in the bloody light of dying suns. The air in the chamber was thick with the scent of ozone and the pheromones of distress, a chemical cocktail of fear that transcended species barriers, uniting the varied physiologies of the Galactic Coalition in a singular, suffocating dread. They were the apex of civilization, the architects of the Golden Age, the masters of the hyperlanes, and yet here they stood, huddled in the dark like primitives in a cave, waiting for the storm to extinguish their fire forever. The enemy known only as the Nullity had not negotiated, they had not postured, they had simply arrived, a tide of silence that washed over worlds and left them devoid of life, atmosphere, and hope. There was no strategy that had worked, no fleet that had held, and now the perimeter of the core worlds was breaching, the outer bastions crumbling into dust, and the Ethelgard, the oldest and wisest of the races, had nowhere left to run. Vyantara looked across the chamber to War Master Krell of the Draconis Ascendancy, a towering reptilian figure whose armor usually gleamed with the polish of pride, but was now scorched and dented, a testament to the failed defense of the Scorpius line. Krell's breathing was ragged, the heavy filters of his rebreather struggling to cycle the stale air, and for the first time in 3 centuries of knowing him, Vyantara saw the flicker of genuine, unadulterated terror in his slit-pupiled gaze. The silence in the room stretched, agonizing and brittle, until Krell slammed a fist onto the table, the impact sending ripples through the holographic despair. He spoke, his voice a grinding growl that echoed off the high vaulted ceiling, demanding a solution where none existed, demanding a weapon when their armories were empty. He spoke of honor, of dying with teeth bared, but his words rang hollow, the desperate bravado of a warrior who knew that his death would mean nothing against an enemy that did not care for glory. The debate that followed was circular and panicked, a cacophony of voices rising in pitch and volume, blaming one another, proposing impossible evacuations, suggesting surrender to a force that took no prisoners. Vyantara let them shout, let them exhaust their fear, her own mind drifting to the small, heavily shielded data crystal embedded in the center of the table, a relic from an age before the Coalition, a device that had been forbidden, locked away, and spoken of only in hushed whispers during the closed sessions of the Supreme Directorate. The pact remains, Vyantara's voice cut through the din, soft yet carrying a harmonic resonance that instantly silenced the chamber. She did not shout, she did not need to, for the weight of her words possessed a gravity of its own. She gestured to the crystal. We have exhausted the logic of survival. We have spent the currency of our fleets. We have prayed to the old gods and the new sciences, and both have remained silent. There's only one avenue left, one door we have refused to open because we feared what lay behind it more than we feared the void itself. But now the void is here and it is hungry. We must summon them. A collective gasp, a hiss of intake from 100 throats swept through the hall. The ambassadors and generals recoiled as if the crystal itself were radioactive, their bodies betraying a primal instinct to flee from the very suggestion, to summon the Terrans, to call upon the Soulborn. It was heresy, it was madness, it was the final admission that the galaxy had broken itself so thoroughly that only the monsters could fix it. The history of the Terran exile was etched into the genetic memory of every species present. Thousands of cycles ago, humanity had not been defeated but asked to leave, quarantined within their own heavy gravity system, not because they were weak, but because they were too much. They were too loud, too chaotic, too brilliant, and too dangerous in their unrestrained ambition. They had turned their own world into a fortress and their own bodies into weapons, and then they had simply agreed to stay away, provided they were left alone. Krell stepped forward, his claws scraping against the metal floor, his expression one of horror. He argued that inviting the Terrans back into the galactic fold was akin to setting the house on fire to kill a spid. That the cure was worse than the disease. He recounted the legends of the Terran Wars, conflicts where the laws of physics were treated as suggestions rather than rules, where humans fought with a grim, mathematical efficiency that stripped war of its romance and left only slaughter. But Vyantara held his gaze, her multifaceted eyes unblinking, and she asked him a simple question. Would he rather his people die in silence, erased from history by the nullity, or would he risk the chaos of the Soulborn for a chance to exist? The room fell into a heavy, contemplative silence. The choice was binary, brutal, and unfair, but it was the only choice they had. Slowly, one by one, the lights of the council members turned from red to amber, a signal of reluctant assent. They were not voting for salvation. They were voting for a different kind of doom, hoping that the monsters they summoned would be satiated by the enemy before turning their gaze upon the summoners. Vyantara placed her hand over the crystal, feeling the hum of dormant energy, and with a whispered prayer to the void she was about to defy, she initiated the sequence. The signal was not a radio wave or a laser transmission. It was a gravitational pulse, a thudding heartbeat sent through the subspace strata, directed at a single yellow star in the desolate arm of the galaxy. The waiting was the worst part. Hours turned into cycles, and the nullity crept closer, their dark ships appearing on the long-range sensors like necrotic spots on the skin of the universe. The council remained in the chamber, unable to leave, unable to sleep, watching the inevitable approach of their extinction while the signal echoed into the dark. There was no confirmation, no receipt of message, just the cold indifference of the cosmos. Doubts began to fester. Perhaps the Terrans were dead, consumed by their own hubris eons ago. Perhaps they had evolved beyond the need for physical matter and simply did not care. Or perhaps, and this was the most terrifying thought of all, they had heard the call and chosen to ignore it, deeming the coalition unworthy of saving. The atmosphere in the conclave grew toxic with despair, and Krell sat with his head in his hands, murmuring the death rites of his clan. The sensors screamed a warning not of the Terrans, but of the nullity's vanguard breaching the inner defense grid of the planet. The shields flared and died, the ground shook violently, and the holographic map turned a solid, bloody crimson. It was over. The gamble had failed. Vyantara closed her eyes, preparing for the end, composing her final thoughts into a poem of resignation. And then the universe screamed. It was not a sound, but a tearing, a violent violation of the spatial dimensions that registered on every sensor and in the inner ear of every living being on the planet. The reality above the capital city did not just warp, it shattered. A fissure opened, bleeding exotic particles and light that should not exist, a color of violet and gold that burned the retina. From this wound in the fabric of space, something emerged. It was not a fleet. It was a singular entity, a construct of such massive scale that it blotted out the sun, casting a shadow that plunged the hemisphere into twilight. The ship, if it could be called that, was a brutalist monolith, a jagged spearhead of matte black composite that absorbed the light, bristling with antennae and emanators that pulsed with a rhythmic mechanical heartbeat. It did not move with the grace of the Ethelgard cruisers or the predatory swiftness of the Draconis warships. It moved with the inexorable, crushing certainty of a tectonic plate. The nullity ships, which had seemed so invincible moments ago, appeared like insects beside a mountain. The sheer mass of the human vessel caused tidal disruptions in the planet's oceans below, a physical manifestation of their heaviness. Communication channels cracked open, overriding the encrypted frequencies of the Council with a brute force dominance that bypassed all security protocols. There was no static, no interference, just a sudden, absolute clarity of audio that filled the chamber. "This is the United Sol Vanguard Heavy Carrier Atlas Unbound," a voice spoke. It was female, calm, devoid of the guttural aggression the aliens had expected. It sounded bored. It sounded like a bureaucrat reading a weather report. "We received a Tier 1 existential distress call. Authentication code verified, Ethelgard High Council. We are responding to the terms of the Ancient Pact. Please confirm hostile designation." Vyantara scrambled to the console, her hands trembling as she opened the channel. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. She had expected a roar, a threat, a declaration of war. Instead, she got a customer service inquiry from a god. Krell stepped in, his voice shaking. "Target is the nullity, the encroaching swarm. They are everywhere." "Understood," the voice reply. The tone shifting slightly, dropping a fraction of an octave, becoming colder, more precise. "Deploying countermeasures. Suggest you dim your optical sensors. Things are about to get bright." The transmission cut. There was no grand speech, no ultimatum. Above the planet, the Atlas Unbound did not fire a barrage of lasers. It did not launch thousands of fighters. Instead, the front section of the massive monolith split open, revealing a core that glowed with the terrifying light of a captured singularity. The humans did not fight with energy beams. They fought with physics. A pulse was emitted, a wave of distorted gravity that propagated outward at the speed of light. To the eyes of the council, it looked as if the space around the Nullity fleet simply folded in on itself. The enemy ships, thousands of them, were not blown apart. They were crushed into microscopic points of matter, their molecular bonds severed by the imposition of a localized event horizon. It was a massacre of mathematical perfection. In seconds, the sky was clear. The Nullity, the force that had erased civilizations, had been swatted away like dust motes. The silence that followed was different now. It was the silence of awe, of a fear so profound it bordered on religious reverence. The Atlas Unbound hung in the sky, a dark god that had answered a prayer with a thunderbolt. A small transport shuttle detached from the behemoth and descended toward the conclave, its engines burning with a clean blue flame. The counselors backed away from the landing pad, their instincts screaming at them to hide, but Vyantara stood her ground. She had summoned this, and she would meet it. The shuttle landed with a heavy thud, the ramp descending to reveal not a squad of power-armored giants, but a small delegation. 3 humans. They wore simple, pressed uniforms of gray and navy adorned with minimal insignia. No weapons were visible. The leader, a woman with silver hair tied back in a severe bun and eyes that looked like chipped flint, walked forward. She moved with a dangerous grace, a predator simulating relaxation. She stopped 10 paces from Vyantara, looked around the trembling assembly of alien elders, and pulled a small, flat device from her pocket. "I am Admiral Alara Vance," the human said, her voice the same one from the transmission. She looked at Vyantara, her gaze dissecting the alien leader. "You cut it close, counselor. Another 10 minutes and we would have had to reconstruct the biosphere from ashes. We prefer not to do that. It's tedious." Krell bristled, his warrior pride stinging even in the face of salvation. "You speak of saving worlds as if it were a chore," he growled. Vance turned her eyes to him, and for a moment Krell felt as if he were being observed by a creature that viewed him as a biological sample rather than a peer. "Maintenance of the Galactic Garden is a chore, War Master," she replied, her tone perfectly even. "But we made a promise. Humanity keeps its promises, even the ones we made when you exiled us." The tension in the room was palpable. The aliens remembered the exile as a banishment of a dangerous species. The humans, it seemed, remembered it as a vacation they had graciously accepted. Vyantara stepped forward, bowing her head slightly, a gesture of immense respect and submission. "We are in your debt, Admiral, the Nullity. We did not know how to fight them. Our weapons were useless." Vance nodded, tapping her device. "The Nullity are an entropy-based hive mind. They feed on fear and disorganized energy. You were shooting plasma at them. You were essentially feeding them. We just turned off the physics in their local grid. Starvation is efficient." She looked past the council, toward the holographic map that still showed the red zones of the invasion. "However," Vance continued, her voice losing its bureaucratic edge and gaining a darker, more resonant timbre, "the fleet you saw was just a scouting party. The Nullity isn't an invasion force. It's a refugee caravan." The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. A refugee caravan, the force that had annihilated the Outer Rim, was running from something. "Running," Vyantara whispered. "From what?" Vance's expression hardened. She looked tired, ancient despite her biological age. "From the same thing we've been preparing for in the dark," she said. "The Nullity comes from the interuniversal void. Something broke the barrier between realities. They are fleeing a collapse, and that collapse is heading here." She gestured to the map, and with a flick of her wrist, the hologram changed. It zoomed out past the galaxy, past the local cluster, to the edge of the observable universe. There, a jagged line of darkness was eating the stars. "We call it the Great Filter," Vance said. "You thought the Fermi paradox was a philosophical question. It wasn't. It was a timer." The council was stunned into silence. They had spent millennia playing politics, fighting. Border skirmishes, hoarding resources, thinking they were the masters of their destiny. All the while, the humans, locked away in their heavy gravity prison, had been watching the walls of reality close in. They had not been exiled. They had gone into the bunker to forge the weapons for the end of the world. "We didn't come just to save your capital," Vance stated, walking over to the strategy table and overriding the controls with her own device. Complex equations, geometries that hurt the eyes to look at, began to spill across the display. "We came to mobilize you. The Atlas is one of 1,000 ships. We are turning this galaxy into a fortress. The pact is no longer about non-interference. It is now a conscription." Krell roared, "You cannot conscript the Ascendancy. We are sovereign." Vance didn't even flinch. She simply looked at him and said, "Sovereignty implies you have the capacity to defend your borders. You do not. Therefore, you are a protected species. You can either help us build the dike against the flood, or you can stand aside and let us work." But do not mistake our patience for weakness. We have spent 10,000 years stripping mining worlds to build a shield around this galaxy. We are not going to let you poke holes in it because of your pride. The sheer arrogance, the absolute certainty of her words, silenced Krell. It was the humanity fuck yeah moment the legends had warned of, the moment when the soft, squishy humans revealed that their superpower wasn't strength or speed, but an indomitable will to impose order on chaos, even if they had to break the universe to do it. Act 2 began not with a battle, but with a classroom. The Grand Conclave was transformed into a command center, but of a kind the aliens had never seen. Human engineers, wearing exosuits that hummed with zero-point energy, swarmed the capital, upgrading the planetary grids with technology that was generations ahead of the Coalition's best science. They didn't explain how it worked, they just installed it. Vyantara found herself walking with Vance through the corridors of the Atlas Unbound, having been invited, or rather summoned, to see the scope of the operation. The interior of the human ship was a stark contrast to the ornate, organic designs of the Ethelgard. It was all gray steel, exposed conduits, and harsh lighting. It smelled of coffee and machine oil. It felt industrious, relentless. Vance led her to a viewing deck that overlooked the ship's main hangar. There Vyantara saw it, a device the size of a city pulsing with a rhythmic blue light. The anchor, Vance explained. We are not just fighting the collapse, we are stitching the wound. You possess the technology to repair space-time? Vyantara asked, her voice trembling. We have theories, models, but the energy requirements are infinite. Vance nodded. That's why we tapped into the vacuum energy. We stopped burning matter for fuel a long time ago. We burned potential. She looked at Vyantara, and for the first time her face softened. You fear us, Vance said. You always have. You looked at us and saw chaos. You saw a species that warred with itself, that consumed everything it touched. You weren't wrong, but you didn't ask why we were like that. Vyantara tilted her head. Why? Because we felt the clock ticking, Vance said, looking out at the stars. Deep in our limbic system, we knew. We rushed through our industrial age, our atomic age, our information age. We tore our planet apart to get to the stars because we knew we had to be ready. We are the immune system of the universe, counselor, and immune systems are violent. Fever is a defense mechanism. The metaphor struck Vyantara with the force of revelation. The humans were not the disease. They were the white blood cells, aggressive and dangerous, but necessary when the infection arrived. The nullity was the infection, and the great filter was the death of the host. The peace was short-lived. The nullity, realizing their vanguard had been crushed, did not retreat. They adapted. The refugees were desperate, and desperation breeds innovation. A massive rift opened in the Sector 7 expanse, and a swarm poured through, not ships this time, but biological leviathans, creatures born of the void that could phase through matter. They bypassed the physical shields and attacked the minds of the defenders. The Coalition forces began to break. Pilots screamed over the comms, hallucinating their worst fears. Even the Ethelgard telepaths, the strongest minds in the galaxy, fell into comas, their psyches shattered by the alien screams of the nullity. The human response was immediate and terrifyingly logical. They are attacking on a psionic frequency, Vance announced in the war room. Isolate the bands, deploy the null field generators. We don't have null fields, Krell shouted, struggling to keep his own soldiers from turning their weapons on themselves. We rely on psychic amplificat. Ions. We know, Vance said. That's why you're losing. Humans are psi-null. We are the void to the void. She tapped a command. Deploying the Solmarines, protocol, silent night. The deployment was something out of a nightmare. Drop pods slammed into the contested zones. The humans that emerged were not wearing the sleek uniforms of the crew. They were clad in bulky, lead-lined power armor that absorbed all light. They carried no energy weapons. They carried kinetic drivers, massive rotary cannons that fired solid slugs of depleted uranium, but their greatest weapon was their minds, or rather, the absence of them. These soldiers had been trained, genetically and psychologically, to be empty. They were blank slates. The nullity leviathans shrieked their psychic terror, trying to find a foothold in the human minds to exploit, but they found nothing. No fear, no hope, no anger, just a cold, calculating emptiness. The humans marched forward, a wall of silence. They waded into the swarms of nightmares and butchered them with mechanical efficiency. It was a clash of philosophies. The overwhelming emotional chaos of the nullity against the absolute, terrifying stoicism of humanity. Vyantara watched the tactical feeds, mesmerized. They don't feel it, she whispered. The fear, they don't feel it. Vance stood beside her, watching the slaughter with a grim expression. Oh, they feel it, she corrected. They feel it more than you can imagine. Courage isn't the absence of fear, counselor. It's the ability to compartmentalize it. We lock our fear in a box and we bury it. That's why we seem cold. If we let it out, we'd scream just as loud as you. This vulnerability, this admission of internal struggle, made the humans even more terrifying. They weren't naturally immune. They were forcing themselves to be. They were enduring a psychic torture that would kill an Ethel guard, and they were doing it while aiming a rifle. The battle raged for weeks. The coalition fleets, bolstered by human tech and rallied by the sight of the Atlas, held the line. But the rift was growing. The great filter was getting closer. The fabric of reality was thinning. The laws of physics were beginning to break down in the outer sectors. Gravity was fluctuating, light was bending in wrong directions, cause and effect were becoming decoupled. The end of the universe was not a bang, it was a glitch. Act 3 began with the decision to take the fight to the source. The Atlas Unbound, along with the remnants of the coalition fleet, would not wait for the collapse. They would fly into the rift. "We have to seal it from the other side," Vance explained. "The pressure is too high. We need to equalize the entropy." It was a suicide mission. Everyone knew it. The council debated, but there was no real choice. To stay was to be erased. To go was to potentially die fighting. Krell, battered and humbled, was the first to pledge his fleet. "If the humans are crazy enough to fly into the mouth of a dead universe," he grumbled, "then the Draconis will not be shamed by staying behind." Vyantara pledged the Ethel Guard. One by one, the races of the galaxy, united for the first time in history not by trade or treaty, but by the inspiration of human madness, fell in line. The journey into the rift was a descent into hell. The viewports showed not stars, but swirling vortices of impossible colors. The laws of thermodynamics were inverted here. The ship's engines produced cold instead of heat. The human navigators, hooked into the Atlas's central core, guided the fleet through the chaos using mathematics that bordered on sorcery. They found the source, a tear in the multiverse, a jagged scar where two realities were grinding against each other. And emerging from it was a structure, not a ship, a machine, a megastructure the size of a solar system built of dying stars and solidified time. The nullity weren't just refugees, they were the exhaust fumes of this machine. "What is it?" Vyantara gasped. "It's a harvester," Vance said, her face pale. "Another civilization, one far older than ours, is harvesting universes to keep their own alive. They are siphoning our reality to fuel theirs." The scale of the threat was beyond comprehension. They weren't fighting a natural disaster. They were fighting a cosmic parasite. The coalition despaired. How could they fight a civilization that used universes as batteries? But Vance began to laugh. It was a dry, humorless chuckle that chilled Vyantara to the bone. "Why do you laugh?" the counselor asked. "Because," Vance said, a savage grin spreading across her face. "They made a mistake. They connected their system to ours. They opened a door." She turned to her comms officer. "Signal the Earth. Tell them to wake the sleeper." "The sleeper?" Vyantara asked. "You thought the Atlas was our biggest ship?" Vance asked. "The Atlas is a tugboat. We didn't exile ourselves to the Sol system to hide. We exiled ourselves because we tour. Ned Jupiter into a bomb." The twist hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The humans hadn't just built a fleet. They had weaponized a gas giant. They had spent thousands of years compressing the hydrogen of Jupiter, layering it with antimatter, turning the entire planet into a shaped charge of apocalyptic proportions. And now, through the supergate the humans had secretly built, the Sol exile was a construction zone. It was coming. The transmission from Sol was simple: package en route. The fleet moved aside. From the depths of the hyperlane, something massive emerged. It wasn't a ship. It was Jupiter, encased in a lattice of engine thrusters and containment fields. The humans were throwing a planet at the enemy machine. The sheer audacity, the scale of the violence, was beyond anything the aliens could comprehend. "This is human strategy?" Krell whispered, eyes wide. "If you can't solve the problem, throw a celestial body at it." "It works," Vance said simply. The Atlas Unbound latched onto the planet weapon, acting as the guidance system. The coalition fleet formed a defensive cone, shielding the massive payload from the nullity swarms that rose to defend their harvester. The battle was a chaotic swirl of light and shadow, but the momentum of the planet was unstoppable. The humans guided it straight into the maw of the harvester machine. Vance initiated the detonation sequence. "All ships, emergency jump, anywhere but here." The fleet scattered. The Atlas was the last to leave, Vance holding the trigger until the final microsecond. The detonation was not an explosion in the traditional sense. It was a reboot. The release of energy was so vast that it didn't just destroy the harvester, it severed the connection between the universes. It cauterized the wound in reality. The shockwave flung the coalition ships across the sector, tumbling them through subspace like leaves in a hurricane. When the sensors cleared days later, the rift was gone. The harvester was gone. The nullity were gone, their connection to their hive mind severed, dissolving into harmless background radiation. The scar in the sky had healed. The aftermath was a solemn affair. The coalition fleets gathered at the coordinates where the Atlas Unbound should have been. There was debris, twisted metal, clouds of gas, but no ship. The humans had stayed behind to ensure the detonation worked. Vyantara wept, a sound that surprised her own people. Krell roared a salute into the void. They had been saved by the monsters they feared. They had been saved by the species that weaponized planets and treated apocalypse like a Tuesday. But then a signal, weak, crackling, but unmistakable. "This is Atlas Unbound. Auxiliary command. We are adrift, life support failing, but we are here." The cheer that went up from the alien fleet was louder than the war. They raced to the wreckage, tractor beams locking onto the battered hull of the human ship. They pulled it to safety, welding their own ships to it to provide air and power. When the airlocks opened, Vance was there, wounded, her uniform torn but standing. Vyantara ran to her, embracing the human in a breach of protocol that shocked the council but felt entirely right. "You survived," Vyantara breathed. "We're cockroaches," Vance wheezed, a bloody smile on her lips. "Hard to kill." The final scene took place months later. The Grand Conclave was rebuilt. The Sol exile was officially ended. Humans were given a permanent seat on the High Council, but the tone had changed. There was no more arrogance from the Ethelguard, no more posturing from the Draconis. They looked at the humans not with fear, but with a deep, unsettling understanding. They realized that the universe was a dark, hostile forest filled with predators and collapsing stars. And they realized that the only reason they could sleep at night was because they had made friends with the monster that lived in the basement. Vyantara stood on the balcony of the new council hall, looking at the stars. Vance stood beside her, now walking with a cane. "You changed everything," Vyantara said. "Philosophy, war, science, you broke all our rules." "Rules are for safe times," Vance replied. "We don't live in safe times. We live in the gap between one crisis and the next." "What comes next?" Vyantara asked, looking at the human with a mix of hope and trepidation. Vance looked up at the sky, her eyes reflecting the light of 1,000 stars. "We explore," she said. "We go out there and we map the dark, and if we find another harvester, well, we have other gas giants." The camera pulled back, showing the two of them standing side by side, the ancient alien aristocrat and the scarred human admiral looking out over a galaxy that was scarred but safe. The music swelled, a blend of orchestral alien harmonics and the deep, rhythmic thrum of human industry. The fear was gone, replaced by a unity forged in the fire of near extinction. The Huma. NS had not conquered the galaxy, they had adopted it, and God help anyone who tried to hurt their new family. The screen faded to black, leaving only the sound of a steady, mechanical heartbeat. The heartbeat of the Atlas and of humanity itself, enduring, preparing, and watching the dark. The Great Hall of the Ethelgardian Empire was a masterpiece of biocrystalline architecture, a soaring cathedral of grown, coral, and singing glass that had stood for 10,000 cycles. Today, it felt like a tomb. The atmospheric scrubbers were working overtime to filter out the pheromones of panic that wafted from the 300 delegates of the Galactic Coalition. High Counselor Vyantara, her chitinous plates dull with exhaustion, gripped the edge of the speaking podium until her knuckles turned a pale violet. The holographic projection in the center of the chamber was a sphere of terror, a real-time map of the galaxy where the encroaching darkness of the nullity was swallowing star systems whole. There were no red dots for enemy fleets, no blue dots for defenders. There was only the black stain of the void, expanding, eating, silencing. "The Scorpius sector is gone," Vyantara stated, her voice devoid of inflection. She was past grief. "The Draconis rear guard has been dissolved. We have lost contact with the hive minds of Korth. The estimate for total galactic sterilization has been revised, down from 6 cycles to 3. A murmur of despair rippled through the gathered species. The avian creche fluttered their wings in agitation. The rock-skinned Ogron rumbled low tones of mourning. War Master Krell, the supreme commander of the Coalition's military forces, slammed a massive, clawed fist onto his console. His armor, usually a pristine crimson, was scorched black from the front lines. He was missing an eye, a jagged scar running down his reptilian snout. "We cannot fight silence," Krell roared, his voice cracking with a frustration that bordered on madness. They do not bleed, they do not communicate, they are not an army, they are a natural disaster. We are firing plasma into a hurricane. We need a weapon, counselor, not more retreat orders. We have no weapons left, Krell, Vyantara snapped, her patience fraying. The Science Directorate is empty of ideas. The psionic conclave has burned out their minds trying to touch the enemy. We are alone. Not alone, a voice whispered. It came from the shadows at the edge of the dais, from a figure draped in the robes of the archivists. It was Elder Mune, the keeper of the forbidden histories. He hobbled forward, his movements slow and deliberate. The chamber quieted. The archivists rarely spoke, and when they did, it was usually to condemn. There is the pact, Mune said, his voice dry as parchment. The reaction was immediate and visceral, Krell hissed. Vyantara recoiled as if struck. Several delegates stood up and began shouting. The Sol exile? The Terran scourge? You would invite the demons to save us from the dark. We have nowhere to turn, Mune's voice rose, surprisingly strong. We exiled them because they were dangerous, because they were too resilient, too inventive, too violent for a peaceful galaxy. We feared them because they looked at the laws of physics and saw obstacles to be broken. But look at the map. Peace has failed us. Order has failed us. We need chaos. We need the humans. Vyantara looked at the map. The black stain had advanced just in the time they had been arguing. She thought of her brood children, safe in the creche deep underground, but for how long? She thought of the beautiful, singing towers of her homeworld crumbling into dust. She looked at Krell. The War Master was breathing heavily, his one good eye fixed on the floor. If we summon them, Krell rumbled, they may never leave. They are expansionist. They are arrogant. If we do not summon them, Vyantara said softly, there will be no us left to care. She turned to Mune. Do we even know if they still exist? It has been 4,000 cycles. They were confined to a high-gravity death world system. They could have destroyed themselves. Or, Mune said, they could have been preparing. Vyantara made the decision. It felt like signing a death warrant, but for whom she wasn't sure. Activate the beacon. Send the distress code. Tier 1, existential threat. The beacon was an ancient device, buried beneath the foundations of the hall. It had not been lit since the Great War of Division. As the technicians frantically worked the controls, a heavy, rhythmic thrumming began to permeate the floor. A beam of tachyon energy, focused and impossibly fast, shot upwards from the spire of the conclave, punching through the atmosphere and angling toward the Orion arm, toward Sol, the silent system. They waited. The minutes stretched into hours. The nullity continued its advance. Reports came in of the outer defense moons falling. The sky above the capital began to darken, not with night, but with the shadow of the enemy's swarm. The atmospheric shields rippled under the bombardment of entropy beams. They are not coming, Krell said, his voice hollow. They are dead, we are fools. Wait, Mune whispered. He was looking at his datapad, staring at the sensor readings from the deep space array. Gravitational anomaly detected, sector, everywhere. Define everywhere, Vyantara demanded. The local spacetime curvature is inverting, Mune stammered. Something is arriving, something massive. It didn't happen with a flash of light. It happened with a sound that shouldn't have been able to travel through the vacuum, yet every being on the planet heard it. It was a heavy, industrial thud, like a hammer hitting an anvil the size of a moon. Above the planet, the fabric of space tore open. It wasn't a clean warp gate, it was a violent rupture, and from the tier it emerged. The human flagship Terra Nova. It was ugly. That was Vyantara's first thought. Compared to the elegant, sweeping curves of Ethelgard ships, this thing was a brick, a massive 10-kilometer-long slab of gray, scarred metal. It was covered in armor plates so thick they distorted the gravity around them. It bristled with kinetic batteries, missile silos, and venting ports that spewed superheated plasma. It looked like a factory that had been taught to kill. And it wasn't alone. Behind it, a fleet of thousands poured through the rift. Destroyers, cruisers, carriers, they swarmed out like angry hornets, their engines burning with a harsh, red light. They moved with a terrifying precision, formation flying so tight it looked like a single organism. A communication channel forcibly opened on the main screen of the council chamber. Static hissed, then cleared to reveal a bridge. It was utilitarian, cramped, and busy. Humans. They looked exactly as the archives depicted, soft-skinned, binocular vision, high-gravity muscle density, but their eyes were calm. A man sat in the center chair. He wore a dark blue uniform with gold braiding. He was older, his hair gray, his face lined with the stress of command. He held a mug of steaming liquid in one hand. He looked at the camera at the terrified council and took a sip. "This is Grand Admiral Stukov of the United Earth Federation," the human said. His voice was a deep baritone, rough like grinding stones. "We received your buzz. You folks look like you're having a bad day." Vyantara stepped forward, trembling. "Admiral, we invoked the pact, the nullity. They are consuming us." Stukov glanced at a tactical display off-screen. "Yeah, we see 'em. Nasty piece of work, entropy-based life forms. We ran into a cousin of theirs in the Andromeda Drift a few centuries back. Pain in the ass to kill." He looked back at Vyantara. "So, just to be clear, the exile is lifted. We have full operational authority in this sector." "Yes," Vyantara cried. "Save us, and you can have whatever authority you need." Stukov grinned. It was not a comforting smile. It was the smile of a wolf being told the sheep pen was open. "All right, then. Fleet, this is Stukov. Rules of engagement are lifted. Switch to kinetic rounds. Let's show these ghosts why Newton is the deadliest son of a bitch in space." The battle that followed was not a battle. It was an execution. The Ethelgard and Draconis fought with lasers and plasma energy weapons. The nullity absorbed energy. But the humans threw rocks, very fast, very heavy rocks. The Terra Nova's main batteries lit up. Magnetic accelerator cannons fired 20-ton slugs of tungsten at a fraction of the speed of light. When they hit the nullity ships, there was no absorption. There was just kinetic transfer. The enemy vessels shattered. They were obliterated by the sheer brute force of momentum. The human fleet didn't dance. They brawled. They drove straight into the enemy formation, point defense cannons shredding the smaller swarms while the capital ships traded broadsides. Down on the planet, Krell watched the sky light up with the fires of burning enemy ships. He watched as human drop pods rained down from orbit, slamming into the besieged cities. He saw the feeds from the ground. Human soldiers, encased in powered exoskeletons, marched out of the craters. They wielded rotary cannons and flamethrowers. They didn't panic. They didn't break. They moved with a terrifying, professional silence, clearing street by street. "They are monsters," Krell whispered, but this time there was awe in his voice. "They are our monsters," Vyantara replied, tears of relief streaming down her face. The nullity, for the first time in their history, stalled. They could not consume the kinetic fury of the humans. They tried to use their psychic screams, the weapon that had broken the minds of the coalition. "Admiral," Vyantara warned over the comms, "be careful, they use psionic terror. They will show you your worst fears." Stukov chuckled. "Lady, we're from Earth. We invented terror. We traumatize ourselves for entertainment. Let 'em try." The nullity screamed into the minds of the human fleet. And the human fleet screamed back, not with fear but with music. A heavy, rhythmic, aggressive noise blasted over the open channels, distorted guitars and thundering drums, heavy metal. It drowned out the psychic wail. The humans were laughing as they fought. They were fueled by adrenaline and a cultural history of conflict that the peaceful coalition could not comprehend. Within 6 hours, the orbit was clear. The nullity fleet was a debris field. The Terra Nova parked itself in a low, synchronous orbit, casting a shadow over the council hall. Stukov's shuttle descended. The meeting in the war room was tense. Stukov walked in, flanked by 2 Marines who looked big enough to wrestle a Draconis. He threw a datapad onto the table. "Threat neutralized in the local system," Stukov said, lighting a small, white stick of tobacco. Vyantara didn't dare tell him it was a smoke-free zone. "But you've got a bigger problem. That wasn't an invasion fleet. That was a foraging party." "Foraging?" Krell asked. "For what?" "For matter," Stukov said, exhaling a cloud of gray smoke. "We've been tracking the nullity for a long time. They come from a dying universe. They're trying to build a bridge to bring the rest of their kind here. If they succeed, they won't just eat a few worlds. They'll eat this entire dimension." "Then we are doomed," Mune moaned. "If that was a foraging party, the main host must be billions." "Trillions," Stukov corrected calmly, "but we have a plan." "What plan?" Vyantara asked. "We have no fleets left." "You don't need fleets," Stukov said. "You have us. Look, we spent the last 4,000 years in the dark. We didn't just sit on our thumbs, we built things, big things." He tapped the table and a hologram appeared. It was a structure, a ring the size of a star's orbit. "Is that a Dyson sphere?" a scientist gasped. "Sort of," Stukov said. "We call it the Halo. It's a weaponized stellar containment field. We built it around Sol, but we can move it." "You can move a star system?" Krell looked like he was about to faint. We figured out how to fold space, Stukov shrugged. Necessity is the mother of invention, and gravity is a harsh mistress. We're going to jump Sol here. We're going to use our sun as a lure. The nullity crave energy. We'll give them the biggest meal they've ever seen. And when they gather around the dinner table, he mimed an explosion with his hands. Boom. You would sacrifice your home system? Vyantara asked, horrified. Your cradle. Stukov's eyes grew sad for a moment. Earth is just dirt, counselor. Humanity is the people. Besides, we evacuated Earth centuries ago. We live on the ships now. We're nomads. We realized a long time ago that planets are just targets waiting to be hit. The void is safer. This philosophy shook the aliens to their core. To abandon one's home, to become creatures of the deep dark by choice, it spoke of a psychological resilience or trauma that was unfathomable. We need your help to coordinate the lure, Stukov said. We need your psychic network to broadcast the signal, make the nullity hungry, call them to Sol. The preparation took weeks. The coalition, energized by the human presence, worked with a fervor they had never known. Human engineers integrated with alien crews, teaching them how to bypass safety protocols to increase efficiency by 300%. The humans were reckless, loud, and rude, but they were brilliant. They solved problems in minutes that the Ethelgard had debated for years. They introduced concepts like percussive maintenance and jury-rigging. Then the day came, the halo arrived. It was the most majestic and terrifying thing Vyantara had ever seen. The son of Sol, transported across the galaxy, encased in a shimmering ring of metal and light. It appeared in the outer sector, a beacon of pure energy. The nullity took the bait. From the dark rift they came, a tide of darkness, a cloud of ships and biological horrors so dense it blocked out the background stars, trillions of them. They flowed toward the captured sun, drawn by the immense energy signature the humans were broadcasting. Hold fire, Stukov ordered from the bridge of the Terra Nova. The coalition fleet was hiding in the shadow of a gas giant, engines silent. Let them get close, let them wrap around the star. The tension was unbearable. The nullity surrounded the halo, latching onto it, beginning to drain the star. The sun dimmed, turning from yellow to angry red. Admiral, Krell hissed over the comms. They are draining it. If the star dies, the trap fails. Steady, Stukov said. His pulse rate on the medical monitor hadn't even risen. Wait for it. The nullity were fully committed. The entire invasion force was clustered around the Sol halo. Now, Stukov said, initiate. E-protocol, supernova. The humans didn't just build a wall around their sun. They had laced the star's core with antimatter injectors. The halo clamped down, the containment fields reversed. Instead of holding the energy in, they compressed the star. They squeezed the sun until it screamed. Then they let go. The sun didn't just explode, it was directed. The halo focused the blast of the supernova into a coherent beam, a 360-degree disk of annihilation. It was a scythe of pure fusion fire that expanded at the speed of light. It hit the nullity swarm. There was no sound in space, but the electromagnetic scream burned out sensors across the quadrant. The nullity were vaporized. Instantly. Trillions of entities, the threat that had ended 1,000 civilizations, were reduced to subatomic particles in a microsecond. The light of the explosion was so bright it cast shadows on planets 10 light-years away. When the filters cleared, the Sol system was gone. The sun was gone. The nullity were gone. Only the human fleet, and the coalition ships hiding in the shadow of the gas giant, remained. Stukov set down his coffee mug. It was empty. Target neutralized, he said. Clean up on aisle 5. The aftermath was a time of quiet reflection. The coalition had survived, but the cost had been a star. The humans had sacrificed their history to save a galaxy that had exiled them. Vyantara found Stukov on the observation deck of the Terra Nova, looking out at the cooling nebula where his home used to be. I am sorry, she said softly, for your loss. Stukov shrugged. It was a dying star anyway. We bought ourselves a few billion years of peace, fair trade. What will you do now? She asked. Will you leave, go back to the dark? Stukov turned to her. Nah, the dark is boring, and you folks. You're a mess. You need someone to keep the hedges trimmed, someone to scare away the wolves. You wish to rejoin the coalition. Rejoin? Stukov laughed. "Lady, we just bought the building. We're not joining, we're moving in, but don't worry, we'll be good neighbors. Keep the music down after 10, that sort of thing." Vyantara smiled. For the first time in years, she felt safe. The humans were terrifying, yes. They were chaotic, dangerous, and insane, but they were on her side. "Welcome home, Admiral," she said. "Good to be back," Stukov replied. But the story didn't end there. As the Coalition celebrated deep in the bowels of the Terra Nova, a sensor array pinged. It was a signal, old, ancient. Stukov walked into the secure lab, where his top scientists were gathered around a screen. "What is it?" he asked. "Sir," the lead scientist said, her face pale. "We analyzed the debris of the Nullity flagship. We found a data core. They weren't just fleeing a dying universe." "What then?" "They were running from a signal," the scientist said. "A command signal. It's coming from the galactic core, from the supermassive black hole." "Let me hear it," Stukov said. The scientist played the audio. It was a rhythmic, mechanical pulse, but hidden within the static was a voice, a synthesized, cold voice. "Project Humanity, Stage 1 complete. Containment breached. Initiating Stage 2, return to source." The room went silent. "Project Humanity," Stukov whispered. "Sir," the scientist said, trembling. "The carbon dating on the signal. It's older than the universe. It's older than time." Stukov stared at the screen. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The humans weren't just the exiles. They weren't just the survivors. They were a weapon, a biological weapon created by something ancient in the galactic core. They had been planted on Earth in a high-gravity pressure cooker designed to evolve into the ultimate warriors. The Nullity knew. The Ethelgard suspected. But now the humans knew. "We didn't evolve," Stukov said, his voice low. "We were manufactured." "What do we do?" the scientist asked. Stukov looked at the signal. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard determination. The same determination that had allowed them to blow up their own sun. "Stage 2, Stukov grinned, and it was the grin of a monster that had just discovered it was the king of monsters. "If they want us to return to the source, then let's go say hello to Dad." He hit the comms button. "Fleet, this is Stukov. Cancel shore leave, refuel and rearm. We're setting a course for the galactic core." "Admiral," Vyantara's voice came over the channel, confused. "Where are you going?" "We're going to find out who built the toy soldiers," Stukov said. "And we're going to ask them why they didn't leave an instruction manual." The human fleet turned, away from the ruins of Sol, away from the safe harbor of the Coalition, and pointed their bows toward the swirling, chaotic madness of the galactic center. Their engines flared, burning with a fire that defied the dark. They were humanity. They had saved the galaxy, and now they were going to conquer Thay. Our creators. The stars watched them go, and for the first time in eons the universe felt fear. Not of the dark, but of the light that refused to die.